So this is the last of our meetings for this our Bible series, and by God's grace, what we're going to seek to get through tonight is going over what we need to be doing right now as pertains to the fact that we're living in the day. Typically, now in light of that, let's turn in our Bibles to the book of Leviticus. Let's turn in our Bibles to the book of Leviticus, chapter 23. Leviticus chapter 23. Now, we went over this earlier today. Leviticus chapter 23. Leviticus 23, starting in verse 27. Now, the Day of Atonement was the sixth feast in the whole Jewish year. It was the sixth feast. Verse 27, the Bible says, also on the 10th day of this month, the 10th day of this seventh month, there shall be a day of atonement. It says, it shall be a holy convocation unto you, and ye shall afflict your souls, and offer an offering made by fire unto the Lord. It says, and ye shall do no work in that same day, for it is a day of atonement to make atonement for you before the Lord your God. For whatsoever soul it be that shall not be afflicted in that same day, he shall be cut off from among his people. For whatsoever soul it be that doeth any work in that same day, the same soul will I destroy from among his people. Ye shall do no manner of work. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings. So what the Bible was here outlining was the work that God's people had to do on the Day of Atonement. So what this is symbolizing is that we as God's people living in this anti-typical Day of Atonement, that there are certain things that we must be doing in order to cooperate with our high priest. Does that make sense? Amen. All right. Now, we brought this out earlier. This is an artist's rendition of what is taking place right now in the most holy place as it pertains to the investigative judgment. Notice this. It says, those who would share the benefits of the Savior's mediation should permit nothing to interfere with their duty to perfect holiness in the fear of God. So what God is saying is that we literally have a duty to become perfect in Christ. Does that make sense? All right. It says the precious hours, instead of being given to pleasure, to display, or to gain seeking, should be devoted to an earnest, prayerful study of the word of truth. So, many times we want to find time in order to engage in pleasure and worldly mirth and all of that. But what God is saying that instead of devoting our time to that we should be studying the Bible. I was reading a statement, and it was saying that when some of us are brought before the courts in order to give an answer for our faith, that many of us are going to be embarrassed because we did not study nor understand what we believe as Seventh-day Adventists. This says that the subject of the sanctuary and the investigative judgment should be clearly understood by the people of God. It says all need a knowledge for themselves of the position and work of their great high priest. Now notice that she personalizes this. You see, though God is a high priest in heaven, we need to understand that he is our individual high priest. So if there was not another soul in this entire world, God would still officiate in the most holy place just because you and I were here. Now, it says otherwise, it will be impossible for them to exercise the faith which is essential at this time. So, if we're going to have righteousness by faith, we have to understand the subject of the sanctuary. And it's amazing that many times when I hear the subject of righteousness by faith taught, rarely do I ever hear the sanctuary brought into the conversation. It says, or to occupy the position which God designs them to fill. So if we're going to do the work that God has called each and every one of us to do, we have to clearly understand this subject. Clearly. Every individual has a soul to save or to lose. Each has a case pending at the bar of God, and that's every single one of us. So old and young, each and every one of us, our names are going to be brought up if they are in the book of life. How important mind contemplate often the solemn scene when the judgment shall sit and the book shall be opened, when with Daniel every individual must stand in his lot at the end of days. So what God is saying is that if we are going to be prepared for this time, we need to clearly understand these subjects. Now, do you think that's understanding of these subjects? Satan has done something to us as Seventh-day Adventists in order to close our minds and our eyes to this right here. Notice this. We are living in the time of judgment. This says, in order to be prepared for the judgment, it is necessary that men should keep the law of what? That men should keep the law of God. So one of the things that we have to understand, that in order to pass this judgment, this investigative judgment, our characters have to be in accordance with the law of God. Now, is the law of God imperfect or perfect? So if we're going to pass the judgment that's based upon the law, what condition does our character have to be in? It has to be perfect. Does that make sense? All right. It says that law will be the standard of character in the judgment. The Bible states this very clearly. As many as have sinned in the law shall be judged by the law, in the day when God shall judge the secrets of men by Jesus Christ. It says, and he says that the doers of the law shall be justified. It says faith is essential in order to the keeping of the law of God, for without faith it is impossible to please him, and whatsoever is not of faith is sin. Satan, and this is why Satan loves to teach that keeping the law of God is not important. Satan loves to propagate this teaching, but this is literally contrary to the principles of the gospel. Does anybody know what the purpose of the gospel is for us as human beings? To save us. Now, how does the gospel save us as human beings? What does it do to us that allows us to be saved? Brings us to Jesus. Now, what does Jesus do for us that allows us to be saved? He dies for us, okay. Now, was Christ dying the only thing that was needed in our salvation? No. Exactly. So, though Jesus has died on the cross for our sins, the purpose of the gospel is not just to cross out our past life of sin, but it's to bring us back into harmony with the law of God. This is the purpose of the gospel. And when Satan tries to make us believe that the law of God is not important, he's actually extinguishing the force of the gospel. Does that make sense? All right. Does anybody know what this book is right here? A book called Questions on Doctrine. Anybody ever heard of this book? No. All right. So by God's grace, we're going to do a little investigative research and find out the significance of this book, Questions on Doctrine. Now, this book has greatly influenced the theological trajectory of our church. This is a symbol of something called ministerial inroads. Ministerial inroads. Follow me. Does anybody know who this man is right here? This is a man by the name of Walter Martin. He wrote a book called Kingdom of the Coast, and he was a major evangelical thought leader during the 50s to the 80s. Now, it's very interesting because sadly Satan used this man in order to greatly as Seventh-day Adventists. Notice this. This is taken from a book called Our Evangelical Earthquake. I wish I had a copy to give everybody. It says, Walter Martin, director of cult apologetics for Zondervan Publishing, I wish we had time to talk about Zondervan Publishing Company, was contributing editor of Barnhouse's Eternity magazine. We just don't have time to really. It says he had already written a chapter critical of Adventism in his book, Rise of the Cults, along with several other books about American cults which were considered standard works in that field. So what this is saying is that Walter Martin, he was writing books on cults, and he was putting us as Seventh-day Adventists into this book. It says, so in 1954, still filled with loathing for Adventists, Barnhouse commissioned Martin to write a complete book on them, which would expose and denounce all their evil teachings. So in the 1950s, there was an effort by some evangelicals in order to completely ostracize us as a cult. Now, should we be concerned the world ostracizing us as a cult? No, I mean, who cares what the world thinks? Did Jesus care that people didn't like him? Now, don't get me wrong, Jesus wanted to save everybody, but if we're always trying to micromanage in our mind that, man, this person doesn't like me, that person doesn't like me, and we're always stressing out about how many people don't like us, are we ever going to do the work God has called us to do? But the sad thing is that we as Adventists were stressing out about this. And instead of preaching the three angels' messages, we felt as though that we had to deal with this situation, and how we dealt with it was satanic. Notice this. Does anybody know who this man is right here? No. This is a man by the name of Leroy Froom. This was a major theological powerhouse. I put that in quotations because besides contributing much to Adventism, this man sadly also served Satan in many capacities. Does anybody know who this is? This is a man by the name of Roy Allen Anderson. Roy Allen Anderson. Now these two men were Seventh-day Adventists who were the main writers and contributors to the book Questions on Doctrine. Now just to give a snippet, this book Questions on Doctrine was supposed to be a statement of faith for us as Seventh-day Adventists, telling to the world what we believe, but this book taught that the atonement was finished at the cross. Now, does the Bible teach that the atonement was finished at the cross? No. It doesn't teach that. It doesn't teach that. And this is one of the major theological errors of apostate Protestantism. This is Leroy Froom was the most in-depth researcher of our denomination ever produced. He wrote a very popular set called Prophetic Faith of Our Fathers. I don't know if anybody ever heard of this. It says, and his 2-volume set, Conditionalist Faith of Our Fathers, showed how our basic teachings have been taught by many Christians in earlier centuries. It says, a GC worker from 1926 to 50, he had founded Ministry Magazine and was its editor for 22 years. He became intent on bending everything to the great objective of making our most controverted beliefs acceptable to Walter Martin. So what Leroy Froom started doing, he started manipulating what we believed as Seventh-day Adventists in order to meet the liking of Walter Martin. Now Anderson, a former public evangelist and powerful leader of men. It goes on to say, when Anderson gained General Conference level status as head of the Ministerial Association in 1941, notice this, he immediately to help eliminate 2 songbooks our people had loved for years, one, Christ in Song, and Hymn and Tunes. So Anderson is the one who got rid of the songbook, Christ in Song, and this is the reason why we have the modern day hymnal, which actually has a lot of Catholic hymns in it. It says, a committee had been selected in 1936 to work on the project of placing the songs in a more usable format with larger print and musical accompaniment with all their words. So this was the influence of this book, Questions on Doctrine. Now, one of the reasons why most Seventh-day Adventist pastors do not actually preach Seventh-day Adventism, but actually preach another religion, is because of things like this. Satan knows that if God's people understand this subject of the sanctuary and the investigative judgment and preach it to the world, and the world that receives it, that his head will be crushed and the great controversy will come to a close. Satan understands this, and so he has been seeking gradually to rob this message of its power. Does that make sense? This says, it was clear from the start that Martin had 3 points on which he would accept no disagreement. Now notice this. So these were 3 points that Walter Martin wanted us to agree on. Number 1, that the atonement of Christ was not completed on the cross. So we taught that the atonement of Christ was not completed at the cross, but that he went into the heavenly sanctuary to finish it. Now, is this what the Bible teaches? Yes. Does the book of Hebrews clearly outline this? Yes. That salvation is the result of grace plus the works of the law. Now, sadly, as a result of a false understanding of the gospel, evangelicals really do not understand the principles of righteousness by faith. Does anybody know what the purpose of grace is? Because we have to intelligently understand it. Let's turn to Titus. Let's turn in our Bibles to the book of Titus. Let's turn in our Bibles to the book of Titus. Let's turn to Titus chapter 2. And we're going to find out what the purpose of grace is. Because, many times you will hear people, and, people that we study would say this all the time, well, we're not under the law, but we are under grace. Now, this is true if you understand what that is. Titus chapter 2 and verse 11, it says, "For the grace of God that bringeth us salvation hath appeared to all men, teaching us that denying ungodliness and worldly lusts, we shall live soberly, righteously, and godly in this present world." So the Bible says that grace teaches us to live a holy life. Now, holiness means that you are living in accordance with the law of God. So if you claim to have the grace of God, that means that by default, you are saying that you are keeping the law of God. Does that make sense? So to try to separate the grace of God from the duty to keep God's law is nothing more than deception and foolishness. It says that the Lord Jesus Christ was a created being, not from all eternity. So they thought that we taught that Christ was a created being and that he really wasn't God, but we don't teach that. It says, "And that he partook of man's sinful fallen nature at the incarnation." You see, the Bible does not teach that Jesus took Adam's sinless nature. The Bible doesn't teach that. The Bible teaches that even though Jesus took a sinful, fallen human nature, that he was still able to live a perfect life. You see, this is our hope of living a perfect life as well. That though we have been born in sin and shapen in iniquity, if we link up with Christ, we can literally have victory over every sin. Amen. This is the gospel. This is the gospel that has been preached since the time of the Garden of Eden. This is not just a Seventh-day Adventist teaching. And so Walter Martin wanted to be sure that we renounced these things. But if you renounce these things, then principally you don't have any more Seventh-day Adventism. Now, do you think that we conceded to his demands?
No.
Now, sadly, we did. Sadly, we did. And that's why the book Questions on Doctrine was written. But it's amazing that the prophet prophesied that these things would take place. I mean, to the T. Notice this. This is from First Selected Messages. So this was probably written maybe 60 years, maybe even 70 years before this took place. The enemy of souls has sought to bring in the supposition that a great reformation was to take place among seven. So Satan said that the Seventh-day Adventists need a revival and a reformation. But I need to give them this revival and reformation. It says, and that this reformation would consist in giving up the doctrines which stand as the pillars of our faith. So Satan said that Seventh-day Adventists need a reformation, but in that reformation, they have to stop believing in the sanctuary. They have to stop believing in victory over sin. They have to stop believing in all of these things. It says, and engaging in a process of reorganization. It says the principles of truth that God in his wisdom has given to the remnant church would be discarded. This is why these things are not taught in the pulpits anymore. It says our religion would be changed. So what this is saying is that the religion that most of us are practicing, that most Seventh-day Adventists are practicing right now is not even Seventh-day Adventism. It's something entirely different. It's not even Christianity. It says the fundamental principles that have sustained the work for the last 50 years would be accounted as a... Do you know that there are people, leaders in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, that say that people who believe in these things are fanatics and extremists.
Yes.
It says a new organization will be established. Notice this. Books of a new order would be written. Was this a book of a new order? So the prophet literally prophesied that these things would take place. It says, now notice this, nothing would be able to stand in the way of the new movement. I just want to make it very clear. What Satan has done to our church, there is nothing that can stand in the way of it. You see, we're told that God would even allow Satan to bring in heresy into his church because we have backslidden. And what God is allowing, he's allowing heresy to sift the church. This is what is taking place right now. This is why Seventh-day Adventism is literally something that is completely obscure. This is why we need a revival and reformation. This is why we need it. It says the leaders would teach that virtue is better than vice, but God being removed, they would place their dependence on human power, which without God is absolutely worthless. Their foundation would be built on the sand, and storm and tempest would sweep. I'm telling you, those who are leading, most of the people that are leading out in our church today are literally building upon sand. And I'm telling you, when this crisis breaks, we're told that most of our leaders are going to give up and keep Sunday. That's literally what is going to take place. And so this is why we need to analyze ourselves and say, Lord, it's really not my brother, it's really not my sister, but it's me, oh Lord, that is standing in the need of prayer. If we really understood how serious this is, we would drop to our knees and really pray and plead with the Most High. You see, brothers and sisters, God has given us things, as we went out before, God has given us things in order to prepare for the investigative judgment. You see, God gave us something called a health message. I want us to understand this intelligently. Now, we found out from the Word of God in the book of Romans that we are going to be judged by the what? Exactly, by the law. So, there's not only a moral law, but there is a literal law of our body. You see, when we are not treating our bodies properly, we are actually violating the body. You see, the purpose of the health message was to bring us in accordance with the laws of our body. Notice this. This is, I believe, a picture of pork chops. Now, who here eats pork chops? All right, praise God, we don't eat pork chops. Mercy. It says, let the diet reform be progressive. Let the people be taught how to prepare food without the use of milk and butter. Tell them that the time will soon come when there will be no safety in using eggs, milk, cream, or butter, because the disease in animals is increasing in proportion to the increase of wickedness among men. Now, we brought this out a couple months ago, but these are things that are literally taking place today. When you read in Hosea chapter 4, it talks about that as a result of the wickedness of man, that disease in animals is increasing in proportion to it. And so as a result of this, God told us to get off the meat, get off the animal products. Now, we brought this out before. It says global pork prices rise amid China's pig disease outbreak. So this brings out that this is actually one of the diseases that has ever hit the pork population. Now, if I'm not mistaken, there are, so it says that since then, 1 million pigs have died from the disease. Do you know how much 1 million pigs are? That's a lot of pigs. If I'm not mistaken, I believe, because China is actually the greatest grower of, if I'm not mistaken, I believe they have an inventory maybe of about 400 million pigs, if I'm not mistaken. I may be off on that, but it's a very high figure, a very, very high figure. Now, some may say, well, I don't eat pork. Even though there's disease in pork, I don't eat pork. I eat clean meat. million pounds of beef are recalled for possible salmonella. Does anybody know what salmonella is?
A disease.
It's a disease. Is salmonella a good disease to have in the body? A virus? Bacteria to have in the body? Can salmonella kill you?
Yes.
It can kill you. So, do you want to be eating food that has salmonella in it? No. This is already recalled in October for a total of 12 million pounds of beef. That's about some 55,000 Americans typically eat over a year. And it goes on to say, as of November 15, 246 cases of salmonella illness in 25 states. So literally what the Bible and the Spirit of Prophecy is saying, we clearly see here. Now some may say, I don't eat, beef or chicken or any of those things. I eat fish. I'm a pescatarian. Notice this. Mercury in fish more dangerous than believe scientists. Now we didn't put it up, but they actually have an article pointing out that nearly all fish in the entire world has mercury in it. Does everybody know what mercury does to the body?
But if you, like, a little mercury doesn't kill you, but if you have to take, 5 pounds of mercury, you can die.
Thank you for that excerpt, brother. Let me ask you a question. Would you want to eat a little poison as opposed to big poison?
No.
Or would you not just want to eat any poison? No poison. You see, Satan tries to deceive us many times as it pertains to morality that we can just do little sins. I mean, we're not committing adultery and fornication and drinking and clubbing and all that. It's just a little sin. It's just a little sin. So I don't know about you, but I don't even want a little mercury in my body. Recently I had mercury fillings in my teeth. By God's grace, I took those out and put some other fillings in my teeth. So this goes on to talk about the more we look at mercury, the more toxic it is. So these are scientists saying this. The more they look at mercury, the more toxic they realize that it is. Levels of mercury exposure that are defined as safe by the official limits are actually having adverse, so even what they say is safe is actually having detrimental effects upon the body. Does that make sense? Yeah. All right. The level of mercury in the Pacific Ocean is projected to increase by 50% by 2050. Now, I'm not time setting nor trying to say Jesus is going to come in such and such a date, but I am pretty sure when I tell you that this world is not going to be around by 2050. We are literally in the year 2019. Brothers and sisters, we did not even touch the tip of the iceberg as it pertains to what's going on in this world. If we had a just conception of what is going on right now, if we didn't have Jesus, we would be terrified. Satan is literally consolidating the whole world to completely fight against God. Completely fight against God. If current pollution trends continue unabated, it says this is a wake-up call for all governments to stem the rising tide of mercury pollution and finalize a strong treaty. Now, this will never happen because all of this fish is making people money. And anytime there's money involved, people will continue to break the law and destroy this planet in order to make money. Now, this is on a health spectrum. Notice this. Among those who are waiting for the coming of the Lord, meat eating will eventually be done away. So what this is saying is that if we are really looking for the coming of the Lord, we'll eventually stop eating meat. Flesh will cease to form a part of their diet. All who are connected with our health institutions especially should be educating themselves to subsist on fruits, grains, and vegetables. You see, this is why we need cooking classes so that we can be taught how to cook healthy meals so that we won't even want meat anymore. I ask you a question. Were Adam and Eve eating meat in the Garden of Eden? No. You know, it's so sad. We were doing some canvassing at a place, and as we were talking to a man at the door, he was literally trying to convince me that Adam and Eve were killing and eating animals in the Garden of Eden before sin. And in my mind, I was like, I mean, really? It says, if we move from principle in these things, if we as Christian reformers educate our own taste and bring our diet to God's plan, then we may exert an influence upon others in this matter, which will be pleasing to God. So this is just one aspect in which we need to come into accordance with the law. Does that make sense?
Amen.
Because this is during the time of the investigative judgment. It says, the true fasting, which should be recommended to all, is abstinence from every stimulating kind of food and the proper use of wholesome, simple food, which God has provided in abundance. There's so much to get through. We don't have enough time. I know I'm not going to be able to get through this. Can everybody see what this is a picture of here?
Please.
This is wheat. This is wheat crop. Now, sadly, as a result of Satan's working amongst even the elements, he has distorted even the grains of the world. Anybody ever heard of a company called Monsanto or Bayer? Now, Bayer actually just bought the company Monsanto for $67 billion. Does anybody know what this is? What crop this is?
Corn.
This is corn. And most of the corn in the world is GMO. Most of it. Anybody know what this is?
Carrots. Cabbage.
Think more.
Cabbage.
Carrots.
Beets.
Carrots.
Not carrots, not beets.
Spinach. No. That's not spinach.
These are potatoes. These are potatoes.
So happy.
Anybody know what this is?
Blueberries.
Yes, these are blueberries. Does anybody know what this is?
Cabbage.
This is cabbage. Cabbage. We need to be grown. You know, inspiration says that when this crisis breaks, that the issue of buying and selling is going to be a very serious one. This is taken from the book Country Living. It says the time is fast approaching when the controlling power of the labor unions will be very oppressive. If we are in labor unions, we need to get out of them. Again and again, the Lord has instructed that our people are to take their families away from the cities into the country where they can raise their own provisions. Does anybody know what that word provisions means?
No.
Food, yes. For in the future, the problem of buying and selling will be a very light matter. A very serious one. As we mentioned before, there are going to be many people who will receive the mark of the beast simply for food, shelter, and clothing. And I'm telling you, it's not enough just to preach and to talk about it. We have to be living these things. It says, we should now begin to heed the instruction given us over and over again. Get out of the cities, period. Into rural districts where the houses are not crowded. You know, that's one of the evils of the cities, is that everything is so squeezed together. When God created Adam and Eve, did he give them New York City to live in?
No.
Where the city never sleeps. He put them in a garden. He put them in a garden. Where you will be free from the interference of enemies. This is a symbol of GMO food. They're literally manipulating the genes of food. Now, do you think that that's a good thing or a bad thing? It's a bad thing. Danger of GMO foods is from the website Livestrong. According to the United States Department of Agriculture, at least 80% of corn and approximately 90% of soybeans grown in the United States are modified seeds. 80 to 90%. Health consequences. The rise in autoimmune diseases, infertility, gastrointestinal problems, and chronic diseases may be associated with the introduction of genetically modified food. So they state this very clearly. This is taken from a very interesting book called Seeds of Destruction. Notice this. In San Diego, a small privately owned biotech company named Epicite held a press conference in September 2001. This is interesting. Notice this. To make an announcement about its work, Epicite reported that they had successfully created the ultimate GMO crop contraceptive corn. Does anybody know what a contraceptive is?
No.
It keeps you from getting pregnant and having children. So what this is saying is that this company literally made a declaration that they created crops, corn, that would stop you from having children. Has anybody ever heard of some population control?
No.
You see, some people think that these are conspiracy theories, but this is literally taking place. They're literally trying to depopulate the earth. And this is a means by which they're doing it. They had taken They had taken antibodies from women with a rare condition known as immune infertility, isolated the genes that regulated the manufacture of those infertility antibodies, and using genetic engineering techniques, had inserted the genes into ordinary corn seeds used to produce corn plants. We have a hothouse filled with corn plants that make anti-sperm antibodies. So the food that they're intentionally modifying the food to decrease the population. And we just read in the article that 80% of corn grown in the United States is genetically modified. You see, brothers and sisters, Satan is literally so doing things in this earth so that he can literally destroy humanity completely. It's not just spiritually, but it's physically, socially, in every aspect of human life. This is why we need Christ. This is why we need to be earnest in doing the work that God has called us to do. It says, in God's plan for Israel, every family had a home on the land with sufficient ground for tilling. You know, it would have been so beautiful if Israel had followed God's plan. Do you know that God wanted it? That if Israel was faithful to God, that the kingdom of Israel would have eventually encompassed the entire world. Could you imagine that? That God wanted it where the kingdom of Israel would have still been standing today. But sadly, Israel did not fulfill God's plan. It says, thus were provided both the means and the incentive for a useful, industrious, and self-supporting life, and no devising of men has ever improved upon that plan. Now, it's amazing, who of us grew crops back home in Haiti? You see, especially when we come to America, America teaches us to be dependent upon everybody else for everything. You know, because I know myself growing up, I didn't know how to do anything. I didn't know how to fix the toilet. I didn't know how to grow fruit. I didn't know how to do anything. But you see, when you live in the country, you learn how to do things for yourself. So you're not dependent upon anyone. So the world's departure from it is only to a large degree the poverty and wretchedness that exists today. So this is in the health sector. Now remember, God is seeking to do all of this to bring us back into harmony with the law. Does that make sense? All right. Everybody see what this is? Besides health, God has given us something called dress reform. Everybody get that? Dress reform. Let's turn our Bibles to the book of Peter. Let's turn to 1 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 Peter. 1 Peter chapter 3, starting in verse 1. The Bible says, likewise, ye wives be in subjection to your own husbands, that if any obey not the word, they may also without the word be won by the conversation of the wise. I'm telling you, it's a very special influence that a wife has over a husband. It says, while they behold your chaste conversation coupled with fear. Verse 3. Whose adorning, let it not be that outward adorning of plaiting the hair and of wearing of gold or putting on of apparel, but let it be the hidden man of the heart, which is not corruptible, even the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit, which is in the sight of God of great price. You know, it's a very special thing when a woman understands who she is and she understands her place as a woman. Because you see, there is a work that women can do that men cannot do. Just period. And if women don't understand their calling as women, that work that God has for women to do will never be accomplished. Now, do you think Satan understands the influence of a woman?
Yes.
You know, patriarchs and prophets even goes on to say that Satan likes to use women more than more than he likes to use men because they are more effective in his work. How many men have fallen by adultery through the solicitations of a whorish woman? How many? David, Solomon, and the list goes on and on and on. Is this a modestly dressed woman?
Yes.
Amen. This is taken from a beautiful book called Woman's True Desire. Notice this. A woman's true desire thinks, no. Every facet of her behavior is marked with reserved prudence and restraint. Because she thinks no, she dresses accordingly, i.e. modestly and decently. You see, when a woman understands who she is as a woman, she will dress modestly. You see, when a woman shows her body and her legs and her breasts and her arms and all these things, it shows that she doesn't understand her value as a woman. Dressing like a woman means dressing in a manner that instinctively protects her body. You see, God, and I believe we brought this out before a couple months ago, that God wants it that in order for a man to have the privilege of making love to a woman, that he literally needs to be willing to consecrate his entire life to her. That's how special and sacred that act is. It says, what real woman is not painfully aware of how vulnerable she is? She knows that love will lead to the sacrifice of her virginity, and that pregnancy, childbirth, nursing, and raising her children will mean giving of herself forever. And the simplest, most basic, most compulsory way to protect herself is by her clothing. Now, do you think that our women are being taught to protect themselves by the way they dress? You know, the book Education goes on to say that when a woman dresses modestly, it will literally shield her from 1,000 perils. Do you know that we could literally bring out that once the miniskirt was introduced into popular American culture and around the world, rape increased drastically. Drastically. I mean, really, don't get me wrong. There's no excuse for rape. Please don't misinterpret what I'm saying. But if you put a raw piece of meat in front of a lion, what is that lion going to do? He's going to eat it. When you put a half-naked woman in front of a man who is not connected to God, what is he going to want to do? Yes. Now, he may not always want to rape, but he's going to at least want to fornicate with her. It says, in fact, modesty is the natural stimulant of choice in dealing with male sexuality. Resistance to advances allows physical attraction to be transformed into tenderness and consideration. Provided the woman is not categorical or hurtful in her rejection. They protect themselves with clothing because what they want is to be loved, not coveted. So when a woman understands this, she will act accordingly. Does that make sense? Now, are we teaching this in the church? This is what we're teaching in the church. Notice this. Anybody know who this woman is?
Ariana Grande.
Yes, with rousing accord. So this is a woman by the name of Ariana Grande. Now, please don't take this out of context. I'm not trying to condemn this young woman, for she does not know better. And this is why she needs God-fearing women to show her the way of righteousness. But this picture is actually taken from Aretha Franklin's funeral. She wore this to church. Now, this is not just the world. Many of our women in the church today, in the Seventh-day Adventist church, come to church looking just like this. I remember when I was going to one of our schools in Huntsville, Alabama, that many of the sisters dressed exactly like this. Now, do you think that this is going to help the spirituality of the young men on the campus? Of course not. Now, the saddest thing about it is that when you watch the video of her singing, all of these men are lusting after her. And the worst one is Bill Clinton. You know, Louis Farrakhan, all of them, Al Sharpton, all of them, they're just sitting down and just smiling as this woman's half-naked body is right in front of them. And they're all just smiling in almost glorious satisfaction. Now, it would be laughable if it wasn't so tragic. This says fashion is deteriorating the intellect and eating out the spirituality of our people. Notice this. Notice this. Obedience to fashion is pervading our Seventh-day Adventist churches and is doing more than any other power to separate our people from God. Do you know that fashion is a god? Do you know that fashion is literally a god? And many people are serving the god of fashion. Now, it's not just women. Don't get it wrong. Men are serving the god of fashion as well. This says, I have been shown that our church rules are very deficient. All exhibitions of pride and dress, which is forbidden in the Word of God, should be sufficient reason for church discipline. Now, how many people get disciplined from the church because of their extravagance in dress? And it's not just the young people, it's the old people as well. You know, we have, old sisters come to the church with all their big hats, and we literally think that church is a fashion show. Do we come to church to show off our new attire? This says, self and only self is the object of adoration, and one such professed Christian will lead many away from God. Many away from God. So remember, God is seeking to bring us in harmony with the law. Let's turn our Bibles to the book of Matthew. We're coming to a close. Not Matthew, I'm sorry, Malachi. Let's turn to Malachi. Time would not give us enough opportunity to delve into all that we need to be doing in this Day of Atonement. But this is just a short snippet of what we need to be doing. Malachi chapter 4. Malachi chapter 4, we're going to start in verse 5. Malachi 4, starting in verse 5. We're coming to a close. The Bible says, behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. So, does anybody know what the great and dreadful day of the Lord is?
No.
Yes, it's the second coming of Christ. So what God is saying is that I'm going to send you Elijah before the second coming. Now, is this talking about literal Elijah who stood on Mount Carmel?
Yes.
No.
It's not. Now, when you read in the Gospels, Jesus said that John the Baptist was the fulfillment of this prophecy. Now, did John the Baptist live before the second coming of Christ? No, John the Baptist has been dead for almost 2,000 years now. So this must mean that there is another Elijah that has to come into view before the second coming. And I'm telling you that we are that Elijah as Seventh-day Adventists. Verse 6, it says, and he shall turn the heart of the fathers to the what? To the children. And the heart of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. So the work of Elijah is so serious that the home is made a part of it. So in God's sight, the restoration of the home is so important that he's literally sending Elijah to do a work in the home. Because I'm telling you, when the home is right, everything else will be right. You see, the church is just a collection of little homes. The nation is just a collection of little homes. This is why Satan has destroyed the home. By destroying the home, you destroy the church. By destroying the church, you destroy the nation. So it doesn't matter how many people we try to put into office in order to make America great again, or we try to vote for this politician, Bernie Sanders, or whatever politician it is. If we do not restore the homes and bring them back to a right Christian perspective, nothing is going to take place. So this is, you see this? This is what God is trying to do. That's what God is trying to do. Now, sadly, this is not what is taking place in our world today. Notice this. This is from the Daily News. Virginia teen admits to killing parents for taking his iPod. So this young man literally killed his parents in cold blood, premeditated, because they took his iPod. Now, do you think that that young boy was possessed by a demon? And you know, the crazy part about it is he wasn't even remorseful. This was a couple years ago, so he may be in his 20s now. This says, yeah, he's in his 20s. It says, a 16-year-old Virginia boy said he beat and stabbed his parents to death because he was sick of routine punishments like my dad taking my iPod and stuff. Vincent Parker told investigators that he killed his 57-year-old mother, Carol, and 55-year-old father, Wayne, inside the family's Norfolk home on December 19, 2013, according to his confession revealed in court on Wednesday. I just remembering getting mad. It's all from my dad. All this stuff like my dad taking away my iPod and stuff. So when he got mad, who do you, many times, we say when we get mad, we say that, I lost control. You ever heard that statement before? I lost control. And I heard a minister put it this way. So if we lost control, then who took control? Satan. 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 When Cain killed Abel, do you think that he was possessed with the devil? He was directly possessed. And so was this little boy. It says, Vincent's a smart young man. I believe this was his grandfather speaking. It says, Vincent's a smart young man. I don't know what happened. Because if I don't forgive him, who will? So this is the grandfather of this young man saying that, if I don't forgive my grandson, who's going to forgive him? Because it's very likely that this young 16-year-old boy may end up, I don't know how the laws of North Carolina are, but it's possible that this young boy may be spending the rest of his life in prison. The rest of his life. This is the third Elijah. God needs to restore our homes. You see, if we're going to be prepared for this judgment, we need to set our houses in order, especially those of us who are leaders of households. God is seeking to restore the home. This says the restoration and uplifting of humanity begins in the ballot box. Is that what it says? Begins in the home. The work of parents underlies every other. Society is composed of families and is what the heads of families make it. Out of the heart of the issues of life, in the heart of the community, of the church, and of the nation is the household. The well-being of society, the success of the church, the prosperity of the nation depend upon home influences. This is a symbol of the home. We're going to end upon these points because we need this to be practical. We need it to be practical. If there was ever a time when every house should be a house of prayer, it is now. Infidelity and skepticism prevail, iniquity abounds, corruption flows in the vital currents of the soul, and rebellion against God breaks out in the life. The soul is made the sport of Satan's temptations, and unless some mighty arm is stretched out to rescue him, man goes where the arch rebel leads the way. Now notice this. And yet in this time of fearful peril, some who profess to be Christians have no family worship. You see, brothers and sisters, we're told in Volume 5 that there's going to be many Seventh-day Adventists who are leaders in the cause of God, who are even preaching the truth from the pulpits, who will be lost, but their families after the ways of heaven. I'm telling you personally, I come across a lot of men who make a high profession of religion. And when I see them making these professions, you know what I do? I look directly at their wives and I look at their children. So you mean to tell me that you are a man of God, but yet you can't order your household? There's men that I know who claim to be preaching the truth, but yet their wives look like Jezebel. How in the world can you stand behind and dare to preach the truths of the Word of God, and you can't even order your family after the order of heaven? This is deception. This says they have not a living connection with God. Theirs is a form of godliness without the power. The idea that prayer is not essential is one of Satan's most successful devices. I'm telling you, every single day Satan will believe that prayer is not important. You see, none of us have an inherent spirituality. All of us are naturally in rebellion against God. The only way that we can have a true loving relationship with God and each other, we have to pray. We have to pray. Prayer is the communion with God, the fountain of wisdom, the source of strength, peace, and happiness. Notice this. When I read this, I was almost taken back when I read this. This is taken from a wonderful book called Child Guidance. It's amazing that we as Seventh-day Adventists literally have a book on everything. You want to raise children? Child Guidance. You want to have a good home, Adventist home. You want to know how to live life, ministry of healing. You want to know about prophecy, get great controversy. We literally have a book on absolutely everything, but yet we don't read the books. It says, I know of nothing, now this is the prophet speaking. I know of nothing that causes me so great sadness as a prayerless home. Notice this. I do not feel safe in such a place for us. So she's saying in a house where there is no prayer, she doesn't even feel safe sleeping in that house. Now, mind you, though she was a prophet of God, she was still a sinful, erring mortal. So if she felt that way, how do you think God feels when we don't have prayer in our houses? And were it not for the hope of helping the parents to realize their necessity and their sad neglect, I would not remain. The children show the result of this neglect, for the fear of God is not before them. Brothers and sisters, do you think that there is a serious work that we have to do? You see, because this week we're going to be tested. We're going to be tested upon these points. And the greatest thing that we can do, now, don't get me wrong, this is great where we can come and we can study together and encourage one another. But in order for this to be real, we have to study for ourselves, individually. And then coming together as families and praying like, Lord, how do you want us to order our home? Open up the Bible, open up the spirit of prophecy, and read these books. And I'm telling you, God will direct us each and every step of the way. I can promise you that. I can promise you. Amen?
Amen.
Amen. All right, let's pray. Dear Father in heaven, Lord, you saw on the lifted hands. Dear Father, we want to follow you with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength. Dear Lord, I pray that you would touch my brothers and sisters here in a very, very special way. Touch myself as well. Lord, we have a vigilant foe in Satan who the Bible makes very clear in Peter that he is as a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. But we're so thankful that we have the truest lion, the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And so, dear Father, I pray in a very special way that you will keep us as we go through this week, because we're going to be tested this week. The things that we have heard this weekend, last weekend, dear Father, Satan is going to seek to get us to forget these things. But I pray that we be praying, that we be studying, coming together as families, having worship, dear Lord, and seeking to share this faith with whomever so we come into contact with. Holy Father, I pray that you please keep us to this end. We thank you so much for this revival experience. And I pray that these things will not be effaced from our minds. Please keep us to this end. In Christ's name.